I'm soaring, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov, and this is our special Shvidkoy issue.
We want to unblock.
Highlighted by what was given for the Russian-Ukrainian guilt on the new dimensions of the president's firm, the received states of both Ukraine and the Russian Federation, the oyster of the president's firm, the received states and Ukraine. Tilky has yet to end with reason between President Trump and President Putin. You know, Tilka also showed up with a story about oyster pizza, about Donald Trump's applications for in a short hour, we will be mats. So I'm a statement from the Kremlin. That's what we are at the moment. At the moment, we are my statements of President Trump, buckets then I have to Beulah his telephone conversation with Putin. I am a case, I would say, another cola, to the dialogue with the received states, and the Russian Federation, ostensibly, of course. For what we didn't know yet, there would be another oyster. Mish is the president of both the United States and the Russian Federation. After all, there will be oysters about Budapest. So we are the patron of the Ugric Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who is guided by his sympathies both before Putin and before Trump. Girlfriend, it became known that the presidential oyster will be between an official from the United States and the Russian Federation. The American side will be represented by Mark Ruby, the sovereign secretary from the United States, from the Russian side. I think there will be the minister of the right-hand side of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, the marked president of the test of foreign policy, Yuri Ushakov. The official to this still requires Marco Rubio, who is overgrown with both the department and the president's spring from the states received for torturing the national one, knows that Trump is going to discuss, and the peak of his scope with Putin. Now with Zelensky tomorrow to the White House of the President of Ukraine. Well, Trump, who said to believe that he and Putin had achieved overnight progress, and also talked richly with Putin about the bags with the states received and Russia ending the conflict in Ukraine. Tesh is also an important moment, tied from his warm-up with the president of the Russian Federation. Which, in principle, can mean anything. I'm already talking on a one-time basis, and at a time it can be absolutely clear that in the city the pogroms are tied with tomahawks and post-normal drops, reset the new brightness for missiles, tell him. The type was all the same on knitting itself, and with the fact that Trump is busy. Built a comfortable position for himself on with Putin. Having beaten him with a trial on Putin's ropes with economical preferences and sea sanctions. You know the Russian status of Crimea and not about, and I write Ishim Shlyak. Shlyak, let's say, Zalyaka. I write practically with the same Shlyak, I will say and write at the end. And you can get overgrown with this process on a respectful, close-knit one. The process is positively influenced by the situation tied to the Russian-Ukrainian guilt. So important is his speech supposedly, of course, in that situation. And here, firm the places of the sweep of Trump and Putin, and the real results will be deposited in the end on discounts. Putin, in principle, seriously accepting these threats of Trump. And for a few wines at a time, think about accepting their minds of Trump, allegedly landing on the cob of Trump's presidency, on the cob of his fight in the Oval Office. Comment from the Russian side, forgetting Kirill Dmitry, the Russian wingman decided. Specially presented to the President of Russia on the temples behind the cordon. It is important for the entourage to have a positive and productive telephone briefing between the President and Putin and Trump, with a shield marked out and away and a crock and here. Well, and the statement of the extremely Prime Minister Orban. The planned oyster in the President in the United States and Russia is fine, but for the marauding people, we are ready for this retinue. And Orban wrote secretly social. So I'm going to continue. I will continue to talk about analogies. Here is a rich person who I am anti-Israeli in lots, says that here the houses of the Yaakis have reached Israel, Hamas has overgrown. It would be possible to still have a beer for that one from Vilna, you are enlisted. And there is a certain amount of truth in the topic. Yakshop Israel whether all on conclusions on their screeching from the territory of the Gaza Strip, and practically on the territory of the Hamas-controlled sector. And overgrown, and because Trump is still extremely dime of a hanging on the end. No one knows, Yak is opposed to Trump's plan for Dali, Yak will be scattered by Hamas and floating looking like a hoax. The reality is that the supporters are not for the fact that the Israeli army has brought her brutal terrorist organizations in the light. I am for pennies and the Jewish state. The result of Trump's plan is nothing. Hamas and the SNU and up to Israel, Israel turning a hand. The moment can be read, but a bloody war with new accomplices and with new strikes on the territory of the Gaza Strip, on. And the joy of Vita over Hamas to Vlada, then those who are on Vitaly are simply shot in public on the square of unnamed places. So that's really possible in the Russian-Ukrainian regulation. I'm already on a disposable chair. At a time, we will chat with you that Putin is clever. The weather on the mind of Yaki Trump has already propane Vav, and it will be the perfect result for Trump. I will punish that it will be so. In the hall now taking the idea of Zakhanchin guilt. I'll tell you them. Knowledge with the received states of the Russian status of the Crimea. Sanctions against the Russian Federation over non-frozen assets. Allegedly, of course, Trump is talking to Putin about the disastrous bags of America and Russia. This is the process itself. You're not thinking about bags. With the received states, Russia will still be given sanctions, right? The emergency supplies to China and India were not purchased by the Russian NAFTA even before they were purchased. Saving the Russian army in the occupied territories. I do not exclude that Moscow will put a test about conclusions on Ukrainian visas on the territory of Donetsk and Lugansk, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia regions. And here it is possible to understand Trump. I just need him so far for the result. Well, to think about the Nobel Prize before the 26th lesson. I'll tell you buckets that before the denunciation as a result of the Nobel Prize 2026 hand, there may be new ones. And guilt may flare up and at a close outcome both in Russia and in Ukraine. And it will end and the view of Trump's peacemaking will be heard by Tilky Skadka. But anything can be done to make you understand the situation. This is the process. I think the cola is overgrown. We are analyzing the results with you. That's why we don't know in principle how it could really end. And it is clear that Putin, I would say, is a credit to Vera. Trump's plum has already been scooped out. It became obvious that they wrote to Anchorage that Trump forces Namag all gave out their obviously foreign policy fiasco for. And amused by the fact that practically the entire American press called what was. Gangan fiasco Fiatsky one by one, and talked about a bunch of diplomatic Russian-American president. And Trump probably won't want that fire itself to repeat in Budapest, then Trump needs to PR. There is still a real result. Moreover, on Tilky, Zustrik with Putin, and Putin's oysters. In the White House, it is contagious from the oysters of the presidents in Russia and Ukraine. Then we will turn the topics again. I'm Kaya, have already discussed Okuridzu. Then Trump is on the cob, talking about a bilateral oyster president. And a trilateral one about the last oyster president from the state received in Russia and Ukraine. Before him, the European leader came to Washington for the European leader, and Vin called Putin. This was the idea of a trilateral Zustrik. I'll drop you off. Bilateral. And I think that the truth is not that I'm not ready for oysters, but Putin just told them aloud. That Zelensky and I also went into the shop itself, and as a result, the workshop and the two-sided oyster, the three-sided oyster came out. It's still a little zilch. Zilch. Well, as we are perfectly fine with you, of course, zilch. We are back in the situation of Cola Trump, about another oyster, another one. Another one about the oyster of the presidents of Russia and Ukraine. I don't know what she really looks like, of course. We will still have Russian comments on the oyster. So in terms of Putin for Trump, Trump will come for Putin, and in configurations of real specifics, allegedly, of course. Contagious in absolutely nothing. In the cipher, we do not tank. Fact. And we can also talk about the fact that the beach manager, have understood the intentions, the adoration of Trump, to turn back to a dialogue with Putin. And his dialogue has overgrown. The counselor may be blind to the fact that it is really possible to put the sense of dialogue on Tilky in economical propositions to Putin, but in the form of a reset of Ukraine. Of course I am. So the soul went to the moment. Well, I'm already going to punish you for the infection. That Putin has managed to get her phone wet so far. I'm not just going to meet with Trump. I will meet with Trump in a cleaning room on the territory of Ukraine, a NATO member, on the territory of Ukraine. Members of the European Union. On the territory of Ukraine, Yaka signed the statute of the International Criminal Court. So, Orban Vita is the same in the cleaning of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. About the warrant of the International Criminal Court. And you, of course, between Netanyahu and Putin are obviously carved with the fact that Netanyahu is as rich as any of the European politicians, respecting partners. And no one in the European Union meets with Putin, and no one has asked for him. And now, not just going to the European Union, but going to the European Union at Trump's request, and supposedly, of course, no one will arrest him there. It has been demonstrated once again that all these warrants of the International Criminal Court are extremely tough. They can be used. Torture by Kevin on the ramp to Budapest. Belittling of Ukraine will be given to the President of the Russian Federation, like a meal on a zustrik with the President. From the staff received in America. Try the dates along the windy corridor on the tilkey of the President of the Russian Federation. The President with bamboo obtained in the state. Here's another kind of being in this situation. Allegedly. Of course. So in that regard, it is also important, and, well, something of a discount peace process, and Trump. Respecting the but for the may button of Russian-Ukrainian regulation. That saying that Hamas will continue to visit people in Gaza, and in everyday life and Hamas. The American president did not say that he himself told Hamas to restore order in Gaza. Allegedly, the situation has already changed. Supposedly, of course, Hamas will continue to spread this to its enemies. I dared to think that his Vlad in the Gaza Strip might pass. Of course, the situation can really develop. The Israel Defense Forces are launching rocket attacks on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli army is turned to those positions it has completed and will open up a new tour. Literally for sprat days of brutally and closely discounted guilt. And to the mayor, and we become 3,000 crayfish in conflict, Tilky Zilch will be heard, and for good luck, for good luck. Zvilno is not a helper. That's what's important. And not hundreds of terrorists at the stage of guilt. Before that, I'll tell you now that we have a century for Russian-Ukrainian regulation. Tied up with the fact that Trump will not deal with the edible conflict, and we don't know, maybe in a month, or maybe in 48. As you know, of course, Hamas was not going to be added with Trump, not easier, but the conclusions of the Israeli army. In exchange for a henchman. And the Hamas people don't exactly think, that my people, that is, they lead and conduct public strata in Gaza. Do not respect the territory of their power. But it's so simple that we are the reason for all the values, and all this widely advertised Trump summit to the mayor. There he spends in Cairo, sweeps and without fate, without the fate of Israel and Hamas, it sounds strange. So in the dark plan, the trials of Yaxia Dal are extremely important. Well, I can tell you one more thing in that regard. We are with you and I. This yak will be on. Yes, the whole situation will develop. Basically, Trump's full tweet. You and I can read it at a time, and, in principle, on our own scale with Putin. Let's get you to it on the text. So I sat down and ended up in a telephone conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin. It was very productive. President Putin provida out this with getting the states out of the mayor's dossier on the near end. It's easier for his words, and I believe success is at an end. Let's help in our supplies with Russia from Ukraine. President Putin Portnikov, for the fate of 4 children, was in the shower in Diokno, and saying that this will continue. We are just as rich in an hour about Russia with the received states of wrapped guilt from Ukraine. We have also completed the offensive oyster of our High Rivnia Springs. Oyster peaches on the side of the received in State Provd, State Secretary Mark Rubio. The mind of different and special beacons will be assigned to no oysters. Please clarify that President Putin and I are in Budapest. Cleaners, what are we on the edge of those glorious blame between Russia and Ukraine? Trump, on the other hand, tomorrow we are with President Zelensky in the Oval Office, and we will discuss with President Putin. The major with President Putin and richly. Rich. That's the progress achieved by printing her today's phone blurbs. Well, that's absolutely obvious. Well, I want to give you torture tasks. And I respect that I will reset the cabin. I will tomahawk to the president in Russia from the one I received in the state. In Budapest. What do you think? And for Trump at a time I will mean, and on the date, I will dump us on the cabin. Cotton wool of progress at cotton wool of progress with Putin. Yaks are such tomahawks. The Kremlin has readily said that he will be the leader of the tomahawk escalation from the side with the received states, and on a direct blow from the received states to the Russian Federation. And such moments are very important for the soul. And it is known that in the whole situation, we can respect the presidents of the United States and Ukraine tomorrow. I will finish their Russian Trump. By Navi in mind will help for our Ukraine. Razmev about Tomahawk is extremely close to us about European missiles against Tauruses, about real packages of temple drops. And Trump will say, Batyush, we are Putin's incandescents. We talked about tomahawks and buckets again adoring the earth. And all in 2 or 3. In 2 or 3 Marco Rubio with Ushakov and Lavrov. According to these, in 2 or 3 we are with Putin, and then it means 2, then we will be able to talk about a bunch. A lot of Putin's diplomacy. Putin on Trump. It's still going to be like this. So Putin did everything before the threat of the real. Shoving against his aggressive Karina, and I could dump on his Visco fishing enterprise on the autotracks. Putin is still facing a threat for the rights of 500th tariffs against China. Another primus when hiring China will think about the correctness, about the reasonableness of buying Russian naphtha away. I will punish what they would buy. Obviously, another tariff for Zagroza continued cotton wool, extremely thinking about what is required with the received states. About the uncomfortable situation for Putin. And that's because it's just a stitch, and for all these Putin, I'm writing again for a diplomatic dialogue with Trump. And when I'm hired into him, I am now for the continuation of terror against our Ukraine. Because in principle, supposedly of course, we are diluting the overgrowth with you. And notifications about the launches of the Shahed in the territory of the Russian Federation are announced on monitoring channels. The fact that no one is elected in Russia, and not for a month, not for 3 times, not for a day, not for a week. And not like Putin's phone with Trump, not Putin, as you, of course, are a mayor lover. Well, otherwise, I will still trump you to decide the result. We will be able to talk to you so much more. And Trump will also cut out the positive tone of the President of the Russian Federation, and on it. I will continue this with Putin's future, and in the Trump family it is adopted. Well, in such situations, it means that tomorrow Trump can again talk about important things away from Viskova, and I will help Ukraine. And I'm telling you a fortune teller, I say that Ukraine wants to pass at the offensive. And even with the receipt of the staff, you will help your own, and therefore in the subject in the process. And the chain gets complicated allegedly, of course, in the situation it meets with Putin. So Ukraine to attack the Russian positions of Chebu-Devada, I will drop the offensive in the situation of Kola. There was already all such a scope. Here's a good torture. So I'm still blurring Putin with Trump. Now we are going to mass the regions of Ukraine. At a time, we are talking about the checkpoints. As a sprat with a drone to Ukraine, straight and ballistic cottage at a time, takes off, already on the territory of Ukraine. And the electricity is turned on, it will mean that Putin has laughed at Trump again. That's it, I'll bargain with him after the wine runs out. I also said that the Russians sent a daughter on Thursday. Today is Thursday. My daughter on Thursday. That's fine. And I will continue my guilt against Ukraine intensity. Well, and you feel the moment, and Maya is not me yet of Russian reactions, the Kremlin of Karol Dmitriev's reaction to the sweep between the President of the United States and the Russian Federation. It is obvious that there will be claims that I think the Kremlin will make its claims lower than the goal happens with Washington. The fact that, in principle, you know that Trump himself can write a tweet, his speechwriters their Shvidko bursts with such texts. And here you are also hanging out with the Kremlin there. The press service of the President of the Russian Federation checks you, of course. And so with Putin, and Putin is not a security officer. But what we are waiting for with you is the result of Russian reactions. After all, it will already be on our air. I am so. So here I get an important point. Well, even before Putin's oyster with Zelensky, the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt said, so we don't know. And it's clear from the truth that Trump's own competence, that she thinks that the respectful extremely wanted, in general. And the plans are that the Russian side and our representations began even on Putin. And Trump, you know, it's similar to the anchor of a Friends season of a Skinner series is not easier. We are Bachel with you, of course. Bachel firm Rubio's oysters and turns with Ushakov and Lavrov. Absolutely to no avail, I hit both the wall under the Withoff to Moscow and Trump's oyster in college. And such enmity is still overgrown. Well, after all, Percy from the trial will still understand. I ask you to subscribe to the channel of those who have not subscribed. There will be millions of people already in the uncle. Who is telling a demo on the channel, and the skin of you can be taken by the fate of the challenge theme. At once on Sprat torture, I was already ether. You put together an expression that we can have a political miracle for Tilka. I don't respect that she can be a political miracle, that there are no miracles in politics. And here you already thought that Putin could not embroider anything. The fault will end. The economical, demographic, and social potential of the Russian Federation has been exhausted. Up to that point, the blame is on Russia and Ukraine, and on the respectful Trump. Trump has a lot more to Putin and missiles. Croc, and before scooping out the potential. As a real croc, and before scooping out the potential. In Russia. So we need to think not about a miracle, but about scooping out, about exposing the potential of the enemy, as a result of long guilt. Wine. And I'm still plotting, the Russian economy has really serious problems. And Trump will be ready to hand over to us the offensive drop of the Russian rocket on the autopilot. At that time, the guilt may end. But maybe the guilt in principle is not the potential completed. Maybe we don't think so. And it can't be Putin's plan to get involved in the bottom of Ukraine's garbage that took out the energy industry. Deprived, but I don't think Putin wants illusions in the hall. Putin doesn't need, not like Putin just namagay, you say correctly, and pulled out participation at the bottom of the dump and Ukraine, so that the Ukrainian economy sprats on the stage of not Ukraine yet, in principle, the fault that Ukraine was in ruins. And his idea is Ukraine is a shlyak in arms, Ukraine with a pretended and on empty. Who gave, I will try and protest, and the Russian Federation. And his idea to bury all these territories from further away and drive to Russia has not gone anywhere. It's just that, of course, the whole idea is unlikely to be implemented. It's also clearly not in Trump's plans there. How can you explain all these generations and Trump's banal fear of Putin? I'm not a fear-defying person. I respect that Trump just doesn't. Of course, I will cut out this situation. There's still Shiro, I'm still on the phone, and Putin, and I don't have any fears to talk to him. His sympathy is up to Putin. The fact that Putin is for him, I am a politician, and a power management facts. Then Putin is extremely like Biden to him, and on the manifested minds, knowledge of the Russian status of the Crimea, and Putin's control over all of the Ukrainian occupied territories, and on the economic sphere in hiring 2029 lesson. So that Trump peacemakers, and in the Nobel Prize, such an ambassador to a friend in return for loot, and Putin, revealing not loot, and the conquest of Ukraine. Trump warmed up all computers. He just can't infect, and yes. And I try crock at a time. Let's say here is a lawsuit against Putin for a pogrom, a tomahawk, and threats to China and India, to the Russian wholesale market. You see, even in those situations, Putin is capable of a serious act. It's just that you don't pass. The warehouse of all these people with their intellectual curves did not require a warehouse. I tend to have hundreds of intellectual populace. Populace in the mind do not explain this, and incompetent and self-imposed. We don't give up about the sprat counter options. Your one option. You so, would you not? Of course, such simple doctors you are there, I do not know. In Ukraine, Nikola did not experience populist bulk. I did not start with the fact that China prima seriously Trump's threats brought down tariffs by purchasing from Russia. I still have a similar solution of notes. And not so, and you are also handing over Trump tariff threats. Right there on the ticks of the threat, Scott Besson said for the rights of the shackle tariffs about China at times. China has not yet brought the Russian NAF. There is also a story with threats and a tied up and out of the cage tariff. It is rare for non-metals to mark. That's what the stock tariff is. You hand over my ideas, and China is elected by its own. Which for the tariff actually takes up bidding in the international, and deals a serious blow to the economy of Ukraine. He also wants, and does not want a position on that. I think that Trump is respectful of China's heavy tariffs. 500 shekels and a tariff. With such a rank, the alignment is more real than prayer in order to get along with China, even before the Russian NAFTA. So is the fact that the forecast of the truth is all a side that defends itself and acts on the aggressor. All this is still with Israel. But I thought to you, you can be tilky such options as from Israel. Yes, you can terrorist gangs there have turned their positions in order to step into the world for now. Pete is the joy of a gang of terrorists, and from the right. The checks come out of them, not Proporon demonstrations, all over the topic idiotic entry. It's all true and it's true. And you are trying to prove that Putin is not Hamas. Putin may feel the Security Council is rich in terrorists, and you have also decided that the Israeli army has withdrawn from the territory of the enclave. They were able to turn the bandits off, if that was given in the past. Such a real speech. Well, Putin looks at Hamas and Qatar, wants to be added with Trump. Bablishka in Instu, there are their funds, business funds. Putin will lie in sight of Qatar. And in China. And maybe it's just beneficial to China that Putin continued to blame. Absolutely real Rishikyu, of course, in those situations. Here. Another day tomorrow, constructively still powders and bowls Trump Putin can be cadence. But we know more. Ready to discuss with Putin real primary ideas. Trump also says that as a result, Putin and I are in ticks to the fact that I will blackmail Putin and reset Trump for Ukraine. And reset the dates that Putin, throwing Trump into Chergov, and over him on the media, and on his adoration. I will approach so from the times between the president from the received states and Ukraine, we still want to get. I'm not sure about the food tomorrow before Trump talks about both Tomahawk and the offensive. It's already about the cash again. But I ask, in the hall before Trump, to lick the torture away in the sleeping of the received states and Ukraine. To the fact that the received states are overestimated by our ally. I will dump Ukraine, and I will dump the passage to the European Ukrainians so that we can defend ourselves. With a bucket of Russian aggression, is not going anywhere. I am not, of course, still with oysters in the president. From the state received in Ukraine, and from the oyster. The president with the received in the state dilutes the president of Russia. Then why does the president of Ukraine have the president with the received in the state? I will influence the idea, of course. I think that it is just necessary to go to Washington to blame for, and it is necessary to get into the Ukrainian position. It is necessary to specifically really trump everything, and with Putin about consultations. Seeing Rubio off at the collective Lavrov-Ushakov and in Budapest. And I'm on a click with the staff received on the Russian Federation, it's not on their energy sponsors. But in an absolute situation, when Trump, let's say, and nothing, God forbid not Putin is still in his wool. Nothing about Putin's wool. So such sketches will lead to torture. Live in the president, firm received in the state in the Russian Federation, to between the president. And firm received in the state in Ukraine. It is possible to believe once again, of course, the Russian reaction will be developed on the given evening, and tomorrow evening. I give it to everyone who was in the terrestrial on-air topic. I'm going to ask you to subscribe to the channel, again, a demo with you on the channel millions. Another skin who signs up, then will help a profitable task, which is not so richly completed up to 1 million. I ask you to put and podobeki, put likes, comment. Overgrown in Ukraine, blackout in rich places, can still be brought out to our so-called friends after it turns on light. I will be in your diaknia, I will be vatch to those who arrest the tool, and vatch to those who reset the forces of Ukraine. Because I would say, the feet of the dropped forces of Ukraine did not allegedly have a mind, of course. And it was not allegedly Ukraine to fight the Russian bulk, and it was not easier to dilute it in the international arena. So by the fate of the parried fees, including being declared on my old people on social you can overlook. I'm notifying you hour by hour against fees and people I know I don't trust. So let the weasel help the Ukrainian army and tear it down to an affordable augie.